Hello, 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 greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of greeting across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome back, my dear scholars, to the study. Hello there, Julian20, welcome, and hello there, Firefly, welcome, welcome, welcome. And I can see earlier on my end, hello there, Dr. Zadium, and hello there, Cool Skeleton. Welcome, welcome, welcome back to the study. It's wonderful to have you all here. Cool Skeleton Elementary, my dear Horace. Although I think Horace would rather prefer playing the part of Sherlock, to be honest. He has many times explained to me how, of course, I'm the Watson to his Sherlock. Go figure. How are you all doing, my fine scholars? I hope you're all doing well. For myself, I have been recovering from quite a bit of this snowfall that's been happening inside the study. We've managed to clear up most of it. We still have some lingering ones, and I am hoping, great I forbid, that we will get it all cleared up within a couple weeks. Cool Skeleton getting hyped for Splatfest this weekend. Oh, is there another Splatfest this weekend? I wasn't aware. What is the topic this time? I had no idea there was a new Splatfest. Odd. I must not. I should have to pay attention to these things. Did you know about this horse? Huh. You didn't either. Well, that figures. I mean, you get so stuck clearing up out of the snow that you don't keep track of anything in the news around you. Julian20, fabulous after shoveling all day. Oh, that's well. I hope that's good. Cool Skeleton. Yep. Which flavor is best? Spicy, sweet, or sour? Huh. That that is a that is a difficult answer. Cool Skeleton. I bet you sweet is gonna have a sweet. Oh, well, I suppose so. I'll have to decide which side I'm on. Oh, your team's sour. Oh, I see. I'm almost leaning on for Team Spicy. I mean, I love a good spicy meal. Hello there, Crusader Corrupted. Welcome. Thank you for the raid. Ah, I really have to work on my raid alerts. I thought I had one prepared, but it seems it's not working. Oh, hello there, Gumdropu. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the study. Wonderful to have you here. It's wonderful to have all you fine scholars here with me this evening, or morning, or afternoon. I mean, I tell you, when you are in an infinitely large library outside the realms of all dimensions, time just really doesn't make much difference anymore. I mean, I don't even know what day it is. Julian20 time is irrelevant. Yes, pretty much. Makes it pretty hard to decide when to have breakfast. I mean, I tend to. I mean, technically, I don't have to eat. I technically don't have to eat, but it's a nice little thing to do. Julian20 all day. Oh, I suppose so. I suppose so. Cool Skeleton breakfast can be all the time. Well, that's what some people say. I mean, personally, I wouldn't say no to a waffle once in a while or a pancake. Makes me hungry, actually. Bit of cheese on the side. I wonder. Maybe after the stream I should check in and see if I can find the kitchen again. Make something a little bit to nibble on. Well, that's something to look forward to. Yes, welcome all you fine new scholars here. I'm so glad to see you here. I suppose I should explain what we are. Well, I suppose I should introduce myself to everyone who hasn't met me. I'm Matsu Quinox, interdimensional omniversal librarian. This is my fine dear friend and assistant, Horace. And this is the study, a infinitely large library outside the realms of normal time and space. Technically, this room is my personal study, just one room in many. But here we are. Cool Skeleton. I don't have to eat since I'm a skeleton. Yeah. well, well, I suppose that's good or bad, whichever you take. I should probably explain about tonight's stream. So, tonight's stream is a belated celebration of Public Domain Day. Yay! Um, for those who don't know, Public Domain Day was on January 1st. Mm. Does everyone know what the public domain means? Cool Skeleton puts on shades. Heck yes. Oh yes. Public Domain Day is so exciting every year. Firefly. Yep. Oh, good, good. I suppose I should explain to those who don't know. Public domain. When something goes into the public domain, Cool Skeleton. Nope, I don't have a brain. Well, good thing I've explained it. When something goes into the public domain, that means that anyone can use it. It is no longer copyrighted. But so if it's a book or a movie or a piece of artwork, anyone can use it. There's no restrictions on it anymore. Private Maverick. I look like Holmes, but I feel like Columbo. I wonder what that was from. That sounds like a quote. Where is that from, Private Maverick? And welcome, Private Maverick. Wonderful to see you here. Usually, what's supposed to be is I think it's every year a something goes in the public domain. Although due to some legalese within the past previous years, there have been unfortunate delays to that process. Private Maverick, Gex Deep Cover Gecko from the PS1 days. Oh, I see. And it mostly boils down to a certain rodent, owners of a certain rodent, who were very disturbed by the fact that one of their first products was going to be put in the public domain. And another thing with the public domain is by law, well, certain laws, mind you, that if a piece of media that has a character in it goes into the public domain, said character usually automatically follows suit. So, said owners of rodent were very, very upset that their character would potentially be in the public domain, and so they had documents done that would delay public domain for quite a bit. But now some of that has gone finally into the hands of the people, and that being the year 1927. Some of the choice items that are now available to everyone is the very first Academy Award-winning film, Wings. Um, the first three books of the Hardy Brothers, one of which was covered by my fellow reading VTuber, Sophia Ignace. And for tonight, as we are going to celebrate the last two stories of Sherlock Holmes. And with that, the entire original written books and stories of Sherlock Holmes are now in the public domain, as well as the character. Which the Doyle estate, who handled the original copyright of Sherlock Holmes, had been fighting for years. Which, if I have time tonight, I will explain. It gets rather silly. Private Maverick, I like Spyro, Gex, and Crash during that era. Skeleton, those were fun series. Aw, nice. I have played both Spyro and Crash. Crash is hard. So tonight, I will be reading one of the stories which has now fallen out of copyright just this year. And with a little bit of time, I will be reading a few other stories, hopefully. We'll see how many I can get through. So, my dear scholars, are you ready for some Holmesian mysteries? Some Doyleish, something or other? I can't think of a word to go with that. Some Doyleish something or others. Julian20, yes, please. Oh, Cool Skeleton, no! Joke. Well, you're gonna listen to it anyway. It's the only thing I've got right now. I have the complete collection in front of me of Sherlock Holmes. Part the curtain. All right. So, tonight's first story comes out of 1927 and is called The Adventure of let's see if I can pronounce this. The Adventure of Shoscombe Old Place. Hard to pronounce some of these names. All right. Just double checking something. And here we go. Sherlock Holmes had been bending for a long time over a low-powered microscope. Now he straightened himself up and looked round at me in triumph. "It is glue, Watson," trying to get the Sherlock voice. "It is glue, Watson," said he. "Unquestionably, it is glue. Have a look at these scattered objects in the field." I stooped to the eyepiece and focused for my vision. "Those hairs are threads from a tweed coat. The irregular grey masses are dust. There are epithelial scales on the left. Those brown blobs in the center are undoubtedly glue." "Well," I said, laughing, "I'm prepared to take your word for it. Does anything depend upon it?" "It is a very fine demonstration," he answered. "In the St. Pancras case you may remember that a cap was found beside the dead policeman. The accused man denies that it is his, but he is a picture frame maker who habitually handles glue. Is it one of your cases?" "No. My friend Merrival of the Yard asked me to look into the case. Since I ran down that corner by the zinc and copper filings in the seam of his cuff, they have begun to realize the importance of the microscope." He looked impatiently at his watch. "I had a new client calling, but he is overdue. By the way, Watson, you know something of racing?" "I ought to. I pay for it with about half my wound pension." "Then I'll make you my handy guide to the turf. What about Sir Robin Norberton? Does the name recall anything?" "Well, I should say so. He lives at Shoscombe Old Place, and I know it well, for my summer quarters were down there once. Norberton nearly came within your province once." "How was that?" "It was when he horsewhipped Sam Brewer, the well-known Curzon Street moneylender, on Newmarket Heath. He nearly killed the man." "Ah, he sounds interesting. Does he often indulge in that way?" "Well, he has the name of being a dangerous man. He's about the most daredevil rider in England, second in the Grand National, a few years back. He is one of those men who have overshot their true generation. He should have been a buck in the days of the Regency, a boxer, an athlete, a plunger on the turf, a lover of fair ladies, and by all account so far down Queer Street that he may never find his way back again." What is that supposed to mean? Really? "Capital, Watson! A thumbnail sketch. I seem to know the man. Now can you give me some idea of Shoscombe Old Place?" "Only that it is in the centre of Shoscombe Park, and that the famous Shoscombe stud and training quarters are to be found there. Private Merrick, oh boy, get your mint juleps, we're going to the Kentucky Derby. Julian 20, I love mint julep. I've never had mint julep. Must try that sometime. Remind me about that, Horace." "And the head trainer," said Holmes, "is John Mason. You need not look surprised at my knowledge, Watson, for this is a letter from him, which I am unfolding. But let us have some more about Shoscombe. I seem to have struck a rich vein." "There are the Shoscombe Spaniels," said I. "You hear of them at every dog show, the most exclusive breed in England. They are the special pride of the lady of Shoscombe Old Place." "Sir Robert Norberton's wife, I presume?" Sir Robert has never married. Just as well, I think, considering his prospects. He lives with his widowed sister, Lady Beatrice Falder. You mean that she lives with him? Oh, no, no. The place belonged to her late husband, Sir James. Norbiton has no claim on it at all. It is only a life interest and reverts to her husband's brother. Meantime, she draws the rents every year. And brother Robert, I suppose, spends the said rents? That is about the size of it. He is a devil of a fellow, and must lead her a most uneasy life. And I have heard that she is devoted to him. But what is amiss at Sherscombe? Ah, that is just what I want to know. And here, I expect, is the man who can tell us. The door had opened, and the page had shown in a tall, clean-shaven man, with the firm, austere expression which is only seen upon those who have to control horses or boys. All right. Mr. John Mason had many of both under his sway, and he looked equal to the task. He bowed with cold self-possession, and seated himself upon the chair to which Holmes had waved him. "You have my notes, Mr. Holmes." "Yes, but explain nothing." "It was too delicate a thing for me to put the details on paper, and too complicated. It was only face to face I could do it." "Well, we are at your disposal." "First of all, Mr. Holmes, I think that my employer, Sir Robert, has gone mad." Holmes raised his eyebrows. "This is Baker Street, not Harley Street," said he. "But why do you say so?" "Well, sir, when a man does one queer thing, or two queer things, there must be a meaning to it. But when everything he does is queer, then you begin to wonder. I believe Sherscombe Prince and the Derby have turned his brains. His brain. That is a colt you are running. The best in England, Mr. Holmes. I should know if anyone does. Now I'll be plain with you, for I know you are gentlemen of honour, and that it won't go beyond the room. Sir Robert has got to win this Derby. He's up to the neck, and it's his last chance. Everything he could raise or borrow is on the horse, and at fine odds too. You can get 40s now, but it was near the 100 when he began to back him." "But how is that, if the horse is so good?" "The public don't know how good he is. Sir Robert has been too clever for the touts. He has the Prince's half-brother out for spins. You can't tell them apart, but there are 2 lengths and a furlong between them when it comes to a gallop. He thinks of nothing but the horse and the race. His whole life is on it, and he's holding off the... Okay, I'm going to skip this line because it is a little bit offensive, and it hasn't aged well. He's holding off the creditors till then. A little bit of a word addition, just to... Yeah, we'll skip the original word there. Till then, if the Prince fails him, he is done. It seems a rather desperate gamble, but where does the madness come in? Well, first of all, we have only to look at him. I don't believe he sleeps at night. He is down at the stables at all hours. His eyes are wide. It has all been too much for his nerves. Then there is his conduct to Lady Beatrice." "Ah! What is that?" "They have always been the best of friends. They had the same tastes, the two of them, and she loved the horses as much as he did. Every day at the same hour she would drive down to see them. And above all, she loved the Prince. He would prick up his ears when he heard the wheels on the gravel, and he would trot out each morning to the carriage to get his lump of sugar. But that's all over now." "Why?" "Well, she seems to have lost all interest in the horses. For a week now she has driven past the stables with never so much as a good morning." "You think there's been a quarrel?" "And a bitter, savage, spiteful quarrel at that. Why else would he give away her pet spaniel that she loved as if he were her child? He gave it a few days ago to old Barnes, what keeps the Green Dragon, 3 miles off at Crendale. That certainly did seem, uh, excuse me, that certainly did seem strange. Of course, with her weak heart and dropsy, one couldn't expect that she could get about with him. But he spent 2 hours every evening in her room. He might well do what he could, for she has been a rare good friend to him. That's all over too. He never goes near her, and she takes it to heart. She is brooding and sulky and drinking, Mr. Holmes, drinking like a fish. Did she drink before this estrangement? Well, she took a glass, but now is often a whole bottle of an evening. Sir Stevens, the butler, told me. It's all changed, Mr. Holmes. There's something damn rotten about it. But then again, what is master doing down at the old church crypt at night? And who's the man that meets him there? Holmes rubbed his hands. Go on, Mr. Mason. You get more and more interesting. Oh, excuse me, I need to get a little drink. It's hard to do these voices. Excuse me. Cool skeleton, that's a lot of water. Well, she's not drinking water. That's kind of the point. She's she's taking part in the spirits, let us say. Go on, Mr. Mason. You get more and more interesting. It was the butler who saw him go. 12 o'clock at night, and raining hard. So next night I was up at the house, and sure enough, master was off again. Stevens and I went after him, but it was jumpy work, for it would have been a bad job if he had seen us. He's a terrible man with his fists if he gets started, and no respecter of persons. So we were shy of getting too near, but we marked him down all right. It was the haunted crypt that he was making for, and there was a man waiting for him there. What is this haunted crypt? Well, sir, there is an old ruined chapel in the park. It is so old that nobody could fix its date. And under it there's a crypt, which has a bad name among us. It's a dark, damp, lonely place by day, but there are few in that county that would have the nerve to go near it at night. But master's not afraid. He never feared anything in his life. But what is he doing there in the night time? Wait a bit, said Holmes. You say there is another man there. He must be one of your own stablemen, or someone from the house. Surely you have only to spot who it is and question him. There's no one I know. How can you say that? Because I have seen him, Mr. Holmes. It was on that second night. Sir Robert turned and passed us, me and Stevens, quaking in the bushes like two bunny rabbits, for there was a bit of moon that night. But we could hear the other moving about behind. We were not afraid of him, so we up when Sir Robert was gone and pretended we were just having a walk like in the moonlight. And so he came right on him as casual and innocent as you please. "Hello, mate, who may you be?" says I. I guess he had not heard us coming, so he looked over his shoulder with a face as if he had seen the devil coming out of hell. He let out a yell, and away he went as hard as he could lick in the darkness. He could run, I'll give him that. In a minute he was out of sight and hearing. And who he was, or what he was, we never found. But you saw him, clearly in the moonlight. Yes, I would swear to his yellow face. A mean dog, I should say. What could he have in common with Sir Robert? Holmes sat for some time lost in thought. Who keeps... Nah, it's hard to get back to Holmes's voice. Who keeps Lady Beatrice Falder company? He asked at last. There is a maid, Carrie Evans. She has been with her these 5 years. And is no doubt devoted. Mr. Mason shuffled uncomfortably. Well, she's devoted enough, he answered at last, but I won't say to whom. Ah, said Holmes, I can't tell tales out of school. I quite understand, Mr. Mason. Of course, the situation is clear enough. From Dr. Watson's description of Sir Robert, I can realize that no woman is safe from him. Don't you think the quarrel between brother and sister may lie there? Well, the scandal has been pretty clear for a long time. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out who says the next line. It doesn't have a say. Okay. But she may not have seen it before. Let us suppose that she has suddenly found it out. She wants to get rid of the woman. Her brother will not permit it. The invalid, with her weak heart and inability to get about, has no means of enforcing her will. The hated maid is still tied to her. The lady refuses to speak, sulks, takes to drink. Sir Robert, in his anger, takes her pet spaniel away from her. Does not all this hang together? Well, it might do, so far as it goes. Exactly. As far as it goes. How would all that bear upon the visits by night to the old crypt? We can't fit that into our plot. No, sir. And there, no, sir. And there is something more that I can't fit in. Why should Sir Robert want to dig up a dead body? Holmes sat up abruptly. We only found it out yesterday, after I'd written to you. Yesterday Sir Robert had gone to London, so Stevens and I went down to the crypt. It was all in order, sir, except that in one corner was a bit of a human body. You informed the police, I suppose? Our visitor smiled grimly. Well, sir, I think it would hardly interest them. It was just the head and a few bones of a mummy. It might have been 1,000 years old, but it wasn't there before. That I'll swear, and so will Stevens. It had been stowed away in a corner and covered over with a board, but that corner had always been empty before. What did you do with it? Well, we just left it there. Changing accents, but well, we just left it there. That was wise. You say Sir Robert was away yesterday. Has he returned? We expect him back today. When did Sir Robert give away his sister's dog? It was just a week ago, today. The creature was howling outside the old well house, and Sir Robert was in one of his tantrums that morning. He caught it up and I thought he would have killed it. Then I gave it to Sandy Bain, the jockey, and told him to take the dog to old Barnes at the Green Dragon, for I never wished to see it again. Holmes sat for some time in silent thought. He had lit the oldest and foulest of his pipes. I am not clear yet what you want me to do in this matter, Mr. Mason, he said at last. Can't you make it more definite? Perhaps this will make it more definite, Mr. Holmes, said our visitor, and he took a paper from his pocket, and unwrapping it carefully, he exposed a charred fragment of bone. Holmes examined it with interest. Where did you get it? There is a central heating furnace in the cellar under Lady Beatrice's room. It's been off for some time, but Sir Robert complained of cold and had it on again. Harvey runs it. He's one of my lads. This very morning he came to me with this, which he found raking out of the cinders. He didn't like the look of it. Nor do I, said Holmes. What do you make of it, Watson? It was burned to a black cinder, but there could be no question as to its anatomical significance. It's the upper condyle of a human femur, said I. Exactly. Holmes had become very serious. When does this lad tend to the furnace? He makes it every evening, and then leaves it. Then anyone could visit it during the night. Yes, sir. Can you enter it from outside? There is one door from outside. There is another, which leads up by a stair to the passage in which Lady Beatrice's room is situated. These are deep waters, Mr. Mason. deep and rather dirty. You say that Sir Robert was not at home last night? No, sir. Then whoever was burning bones, it was not he. That's true, sir. What is the name of that inn you spoke of? Well, the Green Dragon. Is there good fishing in that part of Berkshire? The honest trainer showed very clearly upon his face that he was convinced that yet another lunatic had come into his harassed life. Well, sir, I've heard there are trout in the mill stream and pike in the Hall Lake. That's good enough. Watson and I are famous fishermen, are we not, Watson? You may address us in future at the Green Dragon. We should reach it tonight. I need not say that we don't want to see you, Mr. Mason, but a note will reach us, and no doubt I could find you if I want you. When we have gone a little farther into the matter, I will let you have a considered opinion. Another little drink. Seems they have quite the mystery on their hands. Keep note, my dear scholars. Keep note. I may ask you what the answer to this mystery is. Thus it was that on a bright May evening, excuse me, Holmes and I found ourselves alone in a first-class carriage, and bound for the little halt-on-demand station of Shoscombe. The rack above us was covered with a formidable litter of rods, reels, and baskets. On reaching our destination, a short drive took us to an old-fashioned tavern, where a sporting host, Josiah Barnes, entered eagerly into our plans for the mm, cool skeleton. Wow, a femur. Yes, indeed, a femur. Into our plans for the extirpation of the fish of the neighborhood. What about the Hull Lake and the chance of a pike? Said Holmes. The face of the innkeeper clouded. That won't do, sir. You might chance to find yourself in the lake before you were through. How's that, then? It's Sir Robert, sir. He's terrible jealous of touts. If you two strangers were as near his training quarters as that, he'd be after you as sure as fate. He ain't taking no chances, Sir Robert ain't. I've heard he has a horse entered for the Derby. Yes, and a good colt too. He carries all our money for the race, and all Sir Robert's into the bargain. By the way, he looked at us with thoughtful eyes. I suppose you ain't on the turf yourselves? No, indeed. Just two weary Londoners who badly need some good Berkshire air. Well, you are in the right place for that. There's a deal of it lying about. But mind what I have told you about Sir Robert. He's the sort that strikes first and speaks afterwards. Keep clear of the park. Surely, Mr. Barnes, we certainly shall. By the way, that was a most beautiful spaniel that was whining in the hall. I should say it was. That was the real Soscombe breed. There ain't a better in England. I am a dog fancier myself, said Holmes. Now, if it is a fair question, what would a prize dog like that cost? More than I could pay, sir. It was Sir Robert himself who gave me this one. That's why I have to keep it on a lead. He'll be off to the hall in a jiffy if I gave it its head. We are getting some cards in our hand, Watson, said Holmes when the landlord had left us. It's not an easy one to play, but we may see our way to it in a day or two. By the way, Sir Robert is still in London. I hear. We might perhaps enter the sacred dominion tonight, without fear of bodily assault. There are one or two points on which I should like reassurance. Have you any theories, Holmes? Only this, Watson, that something happened a week or so ago, which has cut deep into the life of the Shoscombe household. What is that something? We can only guess at it from its effects. They seem to be of a curiously mixed character, but that should surely help us. It is only the colorless, uneventful case which is hopeless. Okay, time, scholars, to write down, keep track of what's going to be said, if you want to solve this mystery. Let us consider our data. The brother no longer visits the beloved invalid sister. He gives away her favorite dog. Her dog, Watson. Does that suggest nothing to you? Well, nothing but the brother's spite. Well, it might be so. Or, well, there's an alternative. Now to continue our review of the situation from the time that the quarrel, if there is a quarrel, began. The lady keeps her room, alters her habits, is not seen save when she drives out with her maid, refuses to stop at the stables to greet her favorite horse, and apparently takes to drink. That covers the case, does it not? Save for the business in the crypt. That is another line of thought. There are two, and I beg you will not tangle them. Line one, which concerns Lady Beatrice, has a vaguely sinister flavour, has it not? I can make nothing of it. Cool skeleton. Brother has given away his sister's dog. Doesn't stop to see her favorite horse. Yes. Well now, let us take up line B, which concerns Sir Robert. He is mad keen upon winning the Derby. He is in the hands of the creditors, and may at any moment be sold up and his racing stables seized by these individuals. He is a daring and desperate man. He derives his income from his sister. His sister's maid is his willing tool. So far we seem to be on fairly safe ground, do we not? But the crypt. Ah, yes, the crypt. Let us suppose, Watson, it is merely a scandalous supposition, a hypothesis put forward for argument's sake, that Sir Robert has done away with his sister. My dear Holmes, it is out of the question. Very possibly, Watson. Sir Robert is a man of an honourable stock, but you do occasionally find a carrion crow among the eagles. Let us for a moment argue upon this supposition. He could not fly the country until he had realized his fortune, and that fortune could only be realized by bringing off this cope with Soscombe Prince. Therefore he has still to stand his ground. To do this he would have to dispose of the body of his victim, and we'd also have to find a substitute who would impersonate her. With the maid as his confidant, that would not be possible. The woman's body might be conveyed to the crypt, which is a place so seldom visited, and it might be secretly destroyed at night in the furnace, leaving behind it such evidence as we have already seen. What say you to that, Watson? Well, it is all possible if you grant the original monstrous supposition. I think there is a small experiment which we may try tomorrow, Watson, in order to throw some light on the matter. Meanwhile, if we mean to keep up our characters, I suggest that we have our host in for a glass of his own wine, and note some high converse upon eels and dice, which seem to be the straight road to his affections. We may chance to come upon some useful local gossip in the process. So, gather all your data, my dear scholars. Let us find out what the truth is. Oh, my hands are shaking. Oh, my hands are shaking so badly right now. The book I have is an extra large volume, so it is actually kind of hurting my hands to hold it. In the morning, Holmes discovered that we had come without our spoon bait for Jack, which absolved us from fishing for the day. About 11 o'clock we started for a walk. and he obtained leave to take the black spaniel with us. "This is the place," said he as we came to two high park gates with heretical, hered, heretical, I think it is, griffins towering above them. "About midday, Mr. Barnes informs me, the old lady takes a drive, and the carriage must slow down while the gates are open. When it comes through, and before it gathers speed, I want you, Watson, to stop the coachman with some question. Never mind me, I shall stand behind this holly bush and see what I can see." It was not a long vigil. Within a quarter of an hour we saw the big open yellow brocade coming down the lawn avenue, with two splendid high-stepping gray carriage horses in the shafts. Excuse me. Holmes crouched behind his bush with the dog. I stood unconcernedly swinging a cane in the roadway. A keeper ran out and the gates swung open. The carriage had slowed to a walk, and I was able to get a good look at the occupants. A high-colored young woman with flaxen hair and impudent eyes sat on the left. At her right was an elderly person with rounded back and a huddle of shawls about her face and shoulders, which proclaimed the invalid. When the horses reached the high road, I held up my hand with an authoritative gesture, and as the coachman pulled up, I inquired if Sir Robert was at Choscombe Old Place. At the same moment, Holmes stepped out and released the spaniel. With a joyous cry, it dashed forward to the carriage and sprang upon the step. Then in a moment its eager greeting changed to furious rage, and it snapped at the black skirt above it. "Drive on! Drive on!" shrieked a harsh voice. The coachman lashed the horses, and we were left standing in the roadway. "Well, Watson, that's done it," said Holmes as he fastened the lead to the neck of the excited spaniel. "He thought it was his mistress, and he found it was a stranger. Dogs don't make mistakes." Another bit of evidence, my dear scholars. "But it was the voice of a man," I cried. "Exactly. We have added one card to our hand, Watson, but it needs careful playing all the same." My companions seemed to have no further plans for the day, and we did actually use our fishing tackle in the mill stream, with the result that we had a dish of trout for our supper. Oh, that sounds lovely. Bit of trout. Cool skeleton. A fake, perhaps? Ooh, I wonder. What was that? Where am I? It was only after that meal that Holmes showed signs of renewed activity. Once more we found ourselves upon the same road as in the morning, which led us to the park gates. A tall, dark figure was awaiting us there, who proved to be our London acquaintance, Mr. John Mason, the trainer. "Good evening, gentlemen," said he. "I got your note, Mr. Holmes. Sir Robert has not returned yet, but I hear he is expected tonight." "How far is this crypt from the house?" asked Holmes. "A good quarter of a mile." "Then I think we can disregard him altogether." "I can't afford to do that, Mr. Holmes. The moment he arrives he will want to see me to get the last news of Soscombe Prince." "I see. In that case we must work without you, Mr. Mason. You can show us the crypt and then leave us." It was pitch dark and without a moon, but Mason led us over the grasslands until a dark mass loomed up in front of us, which proved to be the ancient crypt. We entered the broken gap, which was once the porch, and our guide, stumbling among heaps of loose masonry, picked his way to the corner of the building, where a steep stair led down into the crypt. Striking a match, He illuminated the melancholy place, dismal and evil smelling, with ancient crumbling walls of rough-hewn stone and piles of coffins, some of lead and some of stone, extending upon one side, right up to the arched and groaned roof. Not groined. What am I saying? Groaned roof, which lost itself in the shadows above our heads. Holmes had lit his lantern, which shot a tiny tunnel of vivid yellow light upon the mournful scene. Its rays were reflected back from the coffin plates, many of them adorned with the griffin and coronet of this old family, which carried its honors, even to the gate of death. You spoke of some bones, Mr. Mason. Could you show them before you go? They are here in this corner. The trainer strode across and then stood in silent surprise as our light was turned upon the place. They are gone, said he. So I expected, said Holmes, chuckling. I fancy the ashes of them might even now be found in that oven which had already consumed a part. But why in the world would anyone want to burn the bones of a man who's been dead 1,000 years? Asked John Mason. That is what we are here to find out, said Holmes. It may mean a long search, and we need not detain you. I fancy that we shall get our solution before morning. When John Mason had left us, Holmes set to work making a very careful examination of the graves, ranging from a very ancient one, which appeared to be Saxon, in the center, through a long line of Norman Hugos and Odos until we reached the Sir William and Sir Dennis Falder of the 18th century. It was an hour or more before Holmes came to a leaden coffin, standing on end before the hurried but purposeful movements that he had reached the goal. Oh, no, I skipped a line. Why did I skip a line? Oh, dear me. It was an hour more before Holmes came to a leaden coffin, standing on end before the entrance to the vault. I heard his little cry of satisfaction, and was aware from his hurried but purposeful movements that he had reached the goal. With his lens, he was carefully examining the edges of the heavy lid. Then he drew from his pocket a short jemmy, a box opener, which he thrust into a chink, levering it back the whole front, which seemed to be secured by only a couple of clamps. There was a rending, tearing sound as it gave way, but it had hardly hinged back and partially revealed the contents before we had an unforeseen interruption. Now, before I go on, my dear scholars, what do you think is the solution to this mystery? Draw back and look back at the clues that we have. What do you think is happening at Shoscombe Old Place? Yulian 20, I know this story. Then don't give it away then. Don't give away what the solution is. My dear scholars, what do you think the solution is? Well, I try to make my hands stop hurting. Horace, why did you tell me to bring the largest volume of this collection? Okay, I know it's the complete tales, but still, it's pretty hard on the hands. Okay, well, thank you, Horace. That's very kind of you to say. Private Maverick, no idea, boss. I'm no boss. I'm no boss. No, I'm your friend. I'm not a boss. But anyone else have an idea? Cool skeleton. The body was hidden in the crypt, and his sister was replaced by some guy. Ooh, interesting. A substitution. Question is, why would he do this? Whatever would make the brother do this then? That is the problematic question of this. Do we have a motive for the brother? Cool skeleton. Money. Betting on racing horses. Oh, greed. Oh my goodness. So in his greed, he did something to his sister and hid the body in the crypt, and his sister was replaced by some guy. Interesting. Interesting theory. What say the rest of you? Do any of you other scholars have a theory as to what's happening? Anyone at all? I see. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. My goodness gracious. No one at all? Okay, very well. Are you all ready to hear the solution to the adventure of Soscombe Old Place? Unit 20, yes please. Cool skeleton, perhaps. What do you mean perhaps? You don't want to hear the solution? Private Maverick, always ready. Okay. Well, I think it might be time to draw back the curtain on this mystery. Excuse me again. Oh my goodness gracious. Pardon my little coughs. Someone was walking in the chapel above. It was the firm, rapid step of one who came with a definite purpose, and knew well the ground upon which he walked. A light streamed down the stairs, and an instant later the man who bore it was framed in the Gothic archway. He was a terrible figure, huge in stature and fierce in manner. A large stable lantern which he held in front of him shone upward upon a strong, heavily mustached face, and angry eyes which glared round him into every recess of the vault, finally fixing themselves with a deadly stare upon my companion and myself. "Who the devil are you?" he thundered, "and what are you doing upon my property?" Then as Holmes returned no answer, he took a couple steps forward and raised a heavy stick which he carried. "Do you hear me?" he cried. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" His cudgel quivered in the air. But instead of shrinking, Holmes advanced to meet him. "I also have a question to ask you, Sir Robert," he said in his sternest tone. "Who is this, and what is it doing here?" He turned and tore open the coffin lid behind him. In the glare of the lantern I saw a body, swathed in a sheet from head to foot with dreadful, witch-like features, all nose and chin, projecting at one end, the dim glazed eyes staring from a discolored and crumbling face. Ew, that's kind of nasty. The baronet had staggered back with a cry and supported himself against a stone sarcophagus. "How came you to know of this?" he cried, and then with some return of his truculent manner, "What business is it of yours?" "My name is Sherlock Holmes," said my companion. "Possibly it is familiar to you. In any case, my business is that of every other good citizen, to uphold the law. It seems to me that you have much to answer for." Sir Robert glared for a moment, but Holmes' quiet voice and cool, assured manner had their effect. "For God, Mr. Holmes, it's all right," said he. "Appearances are against me, I'll admit, but I could act no otherwise." I should be happy to think so, but I fear your explanations must be before the police." Sir Robert shrugged his broad shoulders. "Well, if it must be, it must. Come up to the house, and you can judge for yourself how the matter stands." A quarter of an hour later, we found ourselves in what I judge, from the lines of polished barrels behind glass covers, to be the gun room of the old house. It was comfortably furnished, and here Sir Robert left us for a few moments. When he returned he had two companions with him. The one, the florid young woman whom we had seen in the carriage. The other, a small rat-faced man with a disagreeably furtive manner. The two wore an appearance of utter bewilderment, which showed that the baronet had not yet had time to explain to them the turn events had taken. "There," said Sir Robert, with a wave of his hand, "are Mr. and Mrs. Norlett. Mrs. Norlett, under her maiden name of Evans, has for some years been my sister's confidential maid. I have brought them here because I feel that my best course is to explain the true position to you, and they are the two people upon earth who can substantiate what I say."
Is this necessary, Sir Robert? Have you thought what you're doing?
cried the woman.
As to me, I entirely disclaim all responsibility, said her husband.
Sir Robert gave him a glance of contempt.
"I will take all responsibility," said he. "Now, Mr. Holmes, listen to a plain statement of the facts. You have clearly gone pretty deeply into my affairs, or I should not have found you where I did. Therefore, you know already, in all probability, that I am running a dark horse for the Derby, and that everything depends upon my success. If I win, all is easy. If I lose, well, I dare not think of that."
"I understand the position," said Holmes.
"I am dependent upon my sister, Lady Beatrice, for everything. But it is well known that her interest in the estate is for her own life only. For myself, I am deeply in the hands of creditors. I have always known that if my sister were to die, my creditors would be on to my estate like a flock of vultures. Everything would be seized, my stables, my horses, everything. Well, Mr. Holmes, my sister did die just a week ago."
Dun dun dun. Oh my goodness.
"And you told no one? What could I do? Absolute ruin faced me. If I could stave things off for 3 weeks, all would be well. Her maid's husband, this man here, is an actor. It came into my head, that he could, for that short period, impersonate my sister. It was but a case of appearing daily in the carriage, for no one need enter her room save the maid. It was not difficult to arrange. My sister died of the dropsy which had long afflicted her.
That will be for a coroner to decide.
A doctor would certify that for months her symptoms have threatened such an end.
Well, what did you do?
What did you do? The body could not remain there. On the first night, Norlett and I carried it out to the old well-house, which is now never used. We were followed, however, by her pet spaniel, which yapped continually at the door, so I felt some safer place was needed. I got rid of the spaniel, and we carried the body to the crypt of the church. There was no indignity or irrelevance, Mr. Holmes. I do not feel that I have wronged the dead."
Your conduct seems to me inexcusable, Mr. Sir Robert. Slip there. The baronet shook his head impatiently.
"It is easy to preach," said he. "Perhaps you would have felt differently if you had been in my position. One cannot see all one's hopes and all one's plans shattered at the last moment, and make no effort to save them. It seemed to me that it would be no unworthy resting place if we put her for the time in one of the coffins of her husband's ancestors, lying in what is still consecrated ground. We opened such a coffin, removed the contents, and placed her as you have seen her. As to the old relics which we took out, we could not leave them on the floor of the crypt. Norlett and I removed them, and he descended at night and burned them in the central furnace. There is my story, Mr. Holmes, though how you forced my hand so that I have to tell it is more than I can say."
Wow, quite the solution. You were very close, cool. Actually, you were pretty on the nose there, cool skeleton. Congratulations. Close on the motive. Very close. Well, no, you were right. You were right. It was about the money, in a way. Holmes sat for some time, lost in thought. "There's one flaw in your narrative, Sir Robert," he said at last. "Your bets on the race, and therefore your hopes for the future, would hold good even if your creditors seized your estate." "The horse would be part of the estate. What do they care for my bets? As likely as not they would not run him at all. My chief creditor is, unhappily, my most bitter enemy, a rascally fellow, Sam Brewer, whom I was once compelled to horsewhip on Newmarket Heath. Do you suppose that he would try to save me?" "Well, Sir Robert," said Holmes, rising, "this matter must of course be referred to the police. It was my duty to bring the facts to light, and there I must leave it. As to the morality or decency of your conduct, it is not for me to express an opinion. It is nearly midnight, Watson, and I think we may make our way back to our humble abode." It is generally known now that this singular episode ended upon a happier note than Sir Robert's actions deserved. Shoscombe Prince did win the Derby, the sporting owner did net £80,000 in bets, and the creditors did hold their hand until the race was over, when they were paid in full, and enough was left to re-establish Sir Robert in a fair position in life. Both police and coroner took a lenient view of the transaction, and beyond a mild censure for the delay in registering the lady's decease, the lucky owner got away scatheless from this strange incident in a career which has now outlived its shadows and promises to end in an honored old age. So that was Soscombe Old Place. Quite the interesting little mystery, isn't it? At least I thought it was. Mm-hmm. So that story, until this year, would not have been able to be read on a stream such as this without the risk of copyright. As of this year, that story is free to read everywhere. Isn't that rather exciting, my dear scholars? Mm-hmm. As you have so patiently sat here and listened to my little reading, I think we have time for one more story, or thereabouts. Hmm? Another drink of water. This one actually is in the public domain. Well, they all are now, so that's kind of a given. This one is another. It's a Sherlock Holmes story I rather like. It is called "The Adventure of the Devil's Foot," and I think this one has a really interesting outcome for it. Mm-hmm. There's kind of a theme in these two, actually. Well, sort of. We shall see. All right, my dear scholars, let us begin the adventure of the Devil's Foot. Excuse me again. Excuse me again. Oh my goodness gracious. Mm. In recording from time to time some of the curious experiences and interesting recollections which I associate with my long and intimate friendship with Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I have continually been faced by difficulties caused with by his own aversion to publicity. To his somber and cynical spirit all popular applause was always abhorrent, and nothing amused him more at the end of a successful case than to hand over the actual exposure to some orthodox official, and to listen with a mocking smile to the general chorus of misplaced congratulation. It was indeed this attitude upon the part of my friend, and certainly not any lack of interesting material, which has caused me of late years to lay very few of his records before the public. Excuse me. My participation in some of his adventures was always a privilege, which entailed discretion and pardon me, getting a word reticence upon me. It was then, with considerable surprise, that I received a telegram from Holmes last Tuesday. He had never been known to write where a telegram would serve, in the following terms: "Why not tell them of the Cornish horror? Strangest case I have handled." I have no idea what backward sweep of memory had brought the matter fresh to his mind, or what freak had caused him to desire that I should recount it. But I hastened, before another cancelling telegram may arrive, to hunt out the notes which give me the exact details of the case, and to lay the narrative before my readers. It was then in the spring of the year 1897 that Holmes' iron constitution showed some symptoms of giving way in the face of constant hard work of a most exacting kind, aggravated perhaps by occasional indiscretions of his own. In March of that year, Dr. Moore Agar of Harley Street, whose dramatic introduction to Holmes I may some day recount, gave positive injunctions that the famous private agent lay aside all his cases, and surrender himself to complete rest, if he wished to avert an absolute breakdown. The state of his health was not a matter in which he himself took the faintest interest, for his mental detachment was absolute, but he was induced at last, on the threat of being permanently disqualified from work, to give himself a complete change of scene and air. Thus it was that in the early spring of that year we found ourselves together in a small cottage near Poldhu Bay, at the further extremity of the Cornish peninsula. Cornwall, if you don't know, I believe it is on the southwest of Great Britain, I think. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm absolutely wrong, please correct me. I don't have a map in front of me, so I can't. I'm only going off memory. And even an omniversal librarian's memory can be somewhat faulty. It was a singular spot, and one peculiarly well suited to the grim humor of my patient. From the window of our little whitewashed house, which stood high upon a grassy headland, we looked down upon the whole sinister semicircle of Mounts Bay, that old death trap of sailing ships, with its fringe of black cliffs and surge-swept reefs, on which innumerable seamen have met their end. With a northerly breeze it lies placid and sheltered, inviting the storm-tossed craft to tack into it for rest and protection. Then comes the sudden swirl round of the wind, the blistering gale from the southwest, the dragging anchor, the lee shore, and the last battle in the creaming breakers. Somehow this sounds incredibly naughty. I don't know why. It's bothering me a little. The wise mariner stands far out from that evil place. On the land side our surroundings were as sombre as on the sea. It was a country of rolling moors, lonely and dun-colored, with an occasional church tower to mark the site of some old-world village. In every direction upon these moors there were traces of some vanished race which had passed utterly away, and left as its sole record strange monuments of stone, irregular mounds, which contained the burned ashes of the dead, and curious earthworks which hinted at prehistoric strife. The glamour and mystery of the place, with its sinister atmosphere of forgotten nations, appealed to the yeah. Where's my name? Appealed to the imagination of my friend, and he spent much of his time in long walks and solitary meditations upon the moor. The ancient Cornish language had also arrested his attention, and he had, I remembered, conceived the idea that it was akin to the Chalding, and had largely derived from the Phoenician traders in tin. Cool skeleton, seamen on the ocean. Oh dear. No, I'm not going to repeat more of that. He had received a consignment of books upon philology, and was settling down to develop this thesis, when suddenly, to my sorrow and to his unfeigned delight, we found ourselves, even in the land of dreams, plunged into a problem at our very doors, which was more intense, more engrossing, and infinitely more mysterious than any of those which had driven us from London. Our simple life and peaceful, healthy routine were violently interrupted, and we were precipitated into the midst of a series of events which caused the utmost excitement not only in Cornwall but throughout the whole west of England. Many of my readers may retain some recollection of what was called at the time the Cornish horror, though a most imperfect account of the matter reached the London press. Now, after 13 years, I will give the true details of this inconceivable affair to the public. I have said that scattered towers marked the villages which dotted this part of Cornwall. The nearest of these was the hamlet of Tredannick Wallace, where the cottages of a couple of hundred inhabitants clustered round an ancient moss-grown church. The vicar of the parish, Mr. Roundhay, was something of an archaeologist, and as such Holmes had made his acquaintance. He was a middle-aged man, portly and affable, with a considerable fund of local lore. At his invitation we had taken tea at the vicarage, and had come to know also Mr. Mortimer Tregellis, an independent gentleman, who increased the clergyman's scanty resources by taking rooms in his large staggering house. The vicar, being a bachelor, was glad to come to such an arrangement, though he had little in common with his lodger, who was a thin, dark, spectacled man. Not speckled. Spectacled man. Speckled? What am I thinking? Spectacles. Spectacled man, with a stoop which gave the impression of acute physical deformity. Cool skeleton. Inconceivable! See, I can do that voice too. I haven't seen that film in such a long time. I'll have to see it again. I remember that during our short visit we found the vicar garrulous, but his larger strangely reticent, a sad-faced, introspective man, sitting with averted eyes, brooding apparently upon his own affairs. Cool skeleton. Austin Powers is a good movie, not for the kiddos. Oh yes, yes, that film. I thought you were referring to Princess Bride for a moment there. Austin Powers. Yeah, I've seen that also once, and yeah, I haven't seen it in years. And it is definitely not for the kiddos. These were the two men who entered abruptly into our little sitting room on Tuesday, March the 16th, shortly after our breakfast hour, as we were smoking together, preparatory to our daily excursion upon the moors. "Mr. Holmes," said the vicar in an agitated voice, "the most extraordinary and tragic affair has occurred during the night. It is the most unheard of business. We can only regard it as a special providence that you should chance to be here at the time, for in all of England you are the one man we need." Cool skeleton. Yeah, it was the one guy with the poison cups. Yes, that was Princess Bride. Cool. Why was I thinking Austin Powers? I don't know. I have no idea. I glared at the intrusive vicar with no friendly eyes, but Holmes took his pipe from his lips, sat up in his chair like an old hound who hears the view hallow. He waved his hand to the sofa, and our palpitating visitor, with his agitated companion, sat side by side upon it. Mr. Mortimer Tregellis was more self-contained than the clergyman, but the twitching of his thin hands and the brightness of his dark eyes showed that they shared a common emotion. "Shall I speak or you?" he asked of the vicar. "Well, you seem to have made the discovery, whatever it may be." Oh, that was Holmes. Oops. "Well, as you seem trying to remember what Holmes's voice sounded like. Well, as you seem to have made the discovery, whatever it may be, and that the vicar to have had it second hand, perhaps you better do the speaking," said Holmes. I glanced at the hastily clad clergyman with the formally dressed lodger seated beside him, and was amused at the surprise which Holmes' simple deduction had brought to their faces. Cool Skeleton, it sounds a bit like younger Scrooge. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep track of all these voices. It's really, really hard to do sometimes. "Perhaps I had best say a few words first," said the vicar. "Then you can judge if you will listen to the details from Mr. Tregellis, or whether you should not hasten at once to the scene of this mysterious affair. I may explain that our friend here spent last evening in the company of his two brothers, Owen and George, and of his sister Brenda, at their house of Trenac Walther, which is near the old stone cross upon the moor. He left them shortly after 10 o'clock, playing cards round the dining-room table, in excellent health and spirits. This morning, being an early riser, he walked in that direction before breakfast, and was overtaken by the carriage of Dr. Richards, who explained he had just been sent for on a most urgent call to Trendek Wather. Mr. Mortimer Tringellis naturally went with him. When he arrived at Trendek Wather, he found an extraordinary state of things." Kintrack. Keeping track of voices are hard, and figuring out who's speaking in a novel even harder. Yes, you know my pain, Kintron, and welcome to the study, Kintron. Good to see you. Where was I? "Mr. Mortimer Tringellis naturally went with him. When he arrived at Trindequartha, he found an extraordinary state of things. His two brothers and his sister were seated round the table exactly as he had left them. The candles still spread in front of them, and the cards still spread in front of them, and the candles burnt down to their sockets. The sister lay back, stone dead in her chair, while the two brothers sat on each side of her, laughing, shouting, and singing, the senses stricken clean out of them. All three of them, the dead woman and the two demented men, retained upon their faces an expression of the utmost horror, a convulsion of terror which was dreadful to look upon. There was no sign of the presence of anyone in the house, except Mrs. Porter, the old cook and housekeeper, who declared that she had slept deeply and heard no sound during the night. Nothing had been stolen or disarrayed, and there is absolutely no explanation of what the horror can be which has frightened a woman to death and two strong men out of their senses. There's the situation, Mr. Holmes, in a nutshell, and if you can help us to clear it up, you will have done a great work." I had hoped that in some way I could coax my companion back into the quiet which had been the object of our journey, but one glance at his intense face and contracted eyebrows told me how vain was now the expectation. He sat for some little time in silence, absorbed in the strange drama which had broken in upon our peace. Taking another drink of water. Remember, dear scholars, whenever reading, hydration is incredibly important. "I will look into this matter," he said at last. "On the face of it, I would appear to be a case of a very exceptional nature. Have you been there yourself, Mr. Roundhay? No, Mr. Holmes. Mr. Tregellis brought back the account to the vicarage, and I at once hurried over with him to consult you. Oh my goodness, cool skeleton. Oh my goodness. I think I need to put a cooldown period on the hydrates. Don't want to drown myself. I do not want to drown myself on accident in water with this. How far is... I had the voice for a second there. How far is it... Yeah. How far is it to the house where this singular tragedy occurred? About a mile inland. Then we shall walk... Yeah. And then we should walk once... Yeah. Trying to get my bearings on this story. Then we shall walk over together. But before we start, I must ask you a few questions, Mr. Mortimer Tregellis. The other had been silent all this time, but I had observed that his more controlled excitement was even greater than the obtrusive emotion of the clergyman. He sat with a pale, drawn face, his anxious gaze fixed upon Holmes, and his thin hands clasped convulsively together. His pale lips quivered as he listened to the dreadful experience which had befallen his family, and his dark eyes seemed to reflect something of the horror of the scene. I can't even remember what Tregellis' voice sounded like. He only had one line before. Ask what you like, Mr. Holmes, said he eagerly. It is a bad thing to speak of, but I will answer you the truth. Tell me about last night. Well, Mr. Holmes, I supped there, as the vicar has said, and my elder brother George proposed a game of whist afterwards. We sat down upon 9 o'clock. It was 10:15 when I moved to go. I left them all round the table as merry as could be. Who let you out? Mrs. Porter had gone to bed, so I let myself out. I shut the hall door behind me. The windows of the room in which they sat was closed, and the blind was not drawn down. There was no change in door or window this morning, or any reason to think that any stranger had been to the house. Yet there they sat, driven clean mad with terror, and Brenda lying dead of fright, with her head hanging over the arm of the chair. I'll never get the sight of that room out of my mind so long as I live. The facts, as you state them, are certainly most remarkable, said Holmes. I take it that you have no theory yourself, which can in any way account for them. It's devilish, Mr. Holmes, devilish, cried Mortimer Tregellis. It is not of this world. Something has come into that room which has dashed the light of reason from their minds. What human contrivance could do that? I fear, said Holmes, that if the matter is beyond humanity, it is certainly beyond me. Yet we must exhaust all natural explanations before we fall back upon such a theory as this. As to yourself, Mr. Tregellis, I take it you were divided in some way from your family, since they lived together and you had rooms apart. That is so, Mr. Holmes, though the matter is past and done with. We were a family of tin miners at Ruderath, but we sold our venture to a company and so retired with enough to keep us. I won't deny that there was some feeling about the division of the money, and it stood between us for a time, but it was all forgiven and forgotten, and we were the best of friends together. Looking back at the evening which you spent together, does anything stand out in your memory as throwing any possible light upon the tragedy? Think carefully, Mr. Tregellis, for any clue which can help us. There is nothing at all, sir. Your people were in their usual spirits? Never better. Were they a nervous people? Did they ever show any apprehension of coming danger? Nothing of the kind. You have nothing to add, then, which could assist me? Mortimer Tregellis considered earnestly for a moment.
There is one thing occurs to me, said he at last. As we sat at the table, my back was to the window, and my brother George, he being my partner at cards, was facing it. I saw him once look hard over my shoulder, so I turned round and looked also. The blind was up and the window shut, but I could just make out the bushes on the lawn, and it seemed to me for a moment that I see something moving among them. I couldn't even say if it was a man or animal, but I just thought there was something there. When I asked him what he was looking at, he told me that he had the same feeling. That is all that I can say. Did you not investigate? No, the matter passed as unimportant. You left them, then, without any premonition of evil? Not at all. I am not clear how you came to hear the news so early this morning. I'm an early riser and generally take a walk before breakfast. This morning I had hardly started when the doctor in his carriage overtook me. He told me that old Mrs. Potter had sent a boy down with an urgent message. I sprang in beside him and we drove on. When we got there, we looked into that dreadful room. The candles and the fires must have burnt out hours before, and they had been sitting there in the dark until dawn had broken. The doctor said that Brenda must have been dead at least 6 hours. There was no sign of violence. She just lay across the arm of the chair with that look on her face. George and Owen were singing snatches of songs and gibbering like two great apes. Oh, it was awful to see. I couldn't stand it, and the doctor was as white as a sheet. Indeed, he fell into a chair in a sort of faint, and we nearly had him on our hands as well. Remarkable. Most remarkable, said Holmes, rising and taking his hat. I think perhaps we had better go down to Tredoc Walther without further delay. I confess that I have seldom known a case which at first sight presented a more singular problem. Our proceedings of that first morning did little to advance the investigation. It was marked, however, at the outset, by an incident which left the most sinister impression upon my mind. The approach to the spot at which the tragedy occurred is down a narrow, winding country lane. While we made our way along it, we heard the rattle of a carriage coming towards us, and stood aside to let it pass. As it drove by us, I caught a glimpse through the closed window of a horribly contorted, grinning face glaring out at us. Those staring eyes and gnashing teeth flashed past us like a dreadful vision. My brothers, cried Mortimer Tringellis, white to his lips. They are taking them to Helston. We looked with horror after the black carriage, lumbering upon its way. Then we turned our steps towards this ill-omened house, in which they had met their strange fate. It was a large and bright dwelling, rather a villa than a cottage, with a considerable garden which was clearly in that Cornish air, well filled with spring flowers. Towards this garden the window of the sitting room fronted, and from it, according to Mortimer Tringellis, must have come that thing of evil which had by sheer horror, in a single instant, blasted their minds. Holmes walked slowly and thoughtfully among the flower plots, and along the path before we entered the porch. So absorbed was he in his thoughts, I remember that he stumbled over the watering pot, upset its contents, and deluged both our feet and the garden path. Inside the house we were met by the elderly Cornish housekeeper, Mrs. Porter, who with the aid of a young girl looked after the wants of the family. She readily answered all Holmes' questions. She had heard nothing in the night. Her employers had all been in excellent spirits lately, and she had never known them more cheerful and prosperous. She had fainted with horror upon entering the room in the morning and seeing that dreadful company round the table. She had, when she recovered, thrown open the window to let the morning air in, and had run down to the lane, whence she sent a farm lad for the doctor.
the lady was on her bed upstairs if we cared to see her. It took 4 strong men to get the brothers into the asylum carriage. She would not herself stay in the house another day, and was starting that very afternoon to rejoin her family at St. Ives. We ascended the stairs and viewed the body. Miss Brenda Tringellis had been a very beautiful girl, though now verging upon middle age. Her dark, clear-cut face was handsome, even in death, but there still lingered upon it something of that convulsion of horror which had been her last human emotion. From her bedroom we descended to the sitting room, where this strange tragedy had actually occurred. The charred ashes of the overnight fire lay in the grate. On the table were the 4 gutted and burned out candles, with the cards scattered over its surface. The chair had been moved back against the walls, but all else was as it had been the night before. Holmes paced with light, swift steps about the room. He sat in the various chairs, drawing them up and reconstructing their positions. He tested how much of the garden was visible. He examined the floor, the ceiling, and the fireplace. But never once did I see that sudden brightening of his eyes and tightening of his lips, which would have told me that he saw some gleam of light in this utter darkness. "Why a fire?" he asked once. Had they always a fire in this small room on a spring evening? Mortimer Tringellis explained that the night was cold and damp. For that reason, after his arrival, the fire was lit. "What are you going to do now, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. My friend smiled and laid his hand upon his arm. "I think, Watson, that I shall resume that course of tobacco poisoning which I have so often and so justly condemned," said he. "With your permission, gentlemen, we will now return to our cottage, for I am not aware that any new factor is likely to come to our notice here. I will turn the facts over in my mid, Mr. Tringellis, and should anything occur to me, I will certainly communicate with you and the vicar. In the meantime, I wish you both good morning." It was not until long after we were back in Poldhu Cottage that Holmes broke his complete and absorbed silence. He sat coiled in his armchair, his haggard and his askant face hardly visible among the blue swirl of his tobacco smoke. His black brows drawn together, his forehead contracted, his eyes vacant and far away. Finally he laid down his pipe and sprang to his feet. "It won't do, Watson," said he with a laugh. "Let us walk together. Let us walk along the cliffs together, and search for flint arrows. We are more likely to find them than clues to this problem. To let the brain work without sufficient material is like racing an engine. It racks itself to pieces. The sea air, sunshine, and patience, Watson. All else will come. Now let us calmly define our position, Watson," he continued as we skirted the cliffs together. "Let us get a firm grip of the very little which we do know, so that when fresh facts arise we may be ready to fit them into their places. I take it, in the first place, that neither of us is prepared to admit diabolical intrusions into the affairs of men. Let us begin by ruling that entirely out of our minds." "Very good. There remains 3 persons who have been grievously stricken by some conscious or unconscious human agency." "That is firm ground. Now, when did this occur? Evidently assuming his narrative to be true, it was immediately after Mr. Mortimer Tringellis had left the room. That is a very important point. The presumption is that it is within a few minutes afterwards. The cards still lay upon the table. It was already past their usual hour for bed. Yet they had not changed their position or pushed back their chairs. I repeat, then, that the occurrence was immediately after his departure, and not later than 11 o'clock last night."
Our next obvious step is to check so far as we can the movements of Mortimer Tringellis after he left the room. In this there is no difficulty, and they seem to be above suspicion. Knowing my methods as you do, you were of course conscious of the somewhat clumsy water-pot expedients by which I obtained a clear impress of his foot. Ah, that's why he did it. Impress of his foot than might otherwise have been possible. The wet sandy patch took it admirably. Last night was also wet, you will remember, and it was not difficult, having obtained a sample print, to pick out track among others, and to follow his movements. He appears to have walked away swiftly in the direction of the vicarage. If then Mortimer Tringellis disappeared from the scene, and yet some outside person afflicted the card players, how could we reconstruct that person? And how was such an impression of horror conveyed? Mrs. Porter may be eliminated. She is evidently harmless. Is there any evidence that someone crept up to the garden window, and in some manner produced so terrific an effect that he drove those who saw it out of their senses? The only suggestion in this direction comes from Mortimer Tringellis himself, who says that his brother spoke about some movement in the garden. That is certainly remarkable, as the night was rainy, cloudy, and dark. Anyone who had the design to alarm these people would be compelled to place his very face against the glass before he could be seen. There's a 3-foot flower border outside this window, but no indication of a footmark. It is difficult to imagine, then, how an outsider could have made so terrible an impression upon the company, nor have we found any possible motive for so strange and elaborate an attempt. You perceive our difficulties, Watson. They are only too clear, I answered with conviction. And yet, with a little more material, we may prove that they are not insurmountable, said Holmes. I fancy that among those your extensive archives, Watson, you may find some which were nearly as obscure. Meanwhile, we shall put the case aside until more accurate data are available, and devote the rest of our morning to the pursuit of Neolithic men. I may have commented upon my friend's power of mental detachment, but never I wondered at it more than upon that spring morning in Cornwall, when for 2 hours he discoursed upon celts, arrowheads, and shards, as lightly as if no sinister mystery was waiting for his solution. It was not until we had returned in the afternoon to our cottage that we found a visitor awaiting us, who soon brought our minds back to the matter in hand. Neither of us needed to be told who that visitor was. The huge body, the craggy and deeply seamed face with the fierce eyes and hawk-like nose, the grizzled hair which nearly brushed our cottage ceiling, the beard, golden at the fringes and white near the lips, save for the nicotine stain from his perpetual cigar. All these were as well known in London as in Africa, and could only be associated with the tremendous personality of Dr. Leon Sterndale, the great lion hunter and explorer. We had heard of his presence in the district, and had once or twice caught sight of his tall figure upon the moorland paths. He made no advance to us, however, nor would we have dreamed of doing so to him, for it is well known that it was his love of seclusion which caused him to spend the greater part of the intervals between his journeys in a small bungalow buried in the lonely wood of Borchamp Arance. Pronunciation, hard to do. Here amid his books and his maps he lived an absolutely lonely life, attending to his own simple wants and paying little apparent heed to the affairs of his neighbors. It was a surprise to me, therefore, to hear him asking Holmes in an eager voice whether he had made any advance in his reconstruction of this mysterious episode. Another drink of water. Forgot how long these stories are. country police are utterly at fault," said he. "But perhaps your wider experiences have suggested some conceivable explanation. My only claim to being taken into your confidence is that during my many residences here, I have come to know this family of Tregellas very well. Indeed, upon my Cornish mother's side, I could call them cousins, and their strange fate has naturally been a great shock to me. I may tell you that I had got as far as Plymouth upon my way to Africa, but the news reached me this morning, and I came straight back again to help in the inquiry."
Holmes raised his eyebrows. "Did you lose your boat through it?"
"I will take the next."
"Dear me, that is friendship indeed."
"I tell you they were relatives."
"Quite so. Cousins of your mother. Was your baggage aboard the ship?"
"Some of it, but the main part at the hotel."
"I see. But surely this event could not have found its way into the Plymouth morning papers."
"No, sir. I had a telegram."
"Might I ask from whom?" A shadow passed over the gaunt face of the explorer.
"You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes."
"It is my business." With an effort, Dr. Sterndale recovered his ruffled composure.
"I have no objection to telling you," he said. "It was Mr. Roundhay, the vicar, who sent me the telegram which recalled me."
"Thank you," said Holmes. "I may say in answer to your original question that I have not cleared my mind entirely on the subject of this case, that I have every hope of reaching some conclusion. It would be premature to say more."
"Perhaps you would not mind telling me if your
I'm tongue-tied. Oh dear, oh dear. Don't make fun of me, Horace. That I have not cleared my mind entirely on the subject of this case, but that I have every hope of reaching some conclusion. It would be premature to say more."
"Perhaps you would not mind telling me if your suspicions point in any particular direction."
"No, I can hardly answer that."
"Then I have wasted my time and need not prolong my visits."
The famous doctor strode out of our cottage in considerably ill humor, and within 5 minutes Holmes had followed him. I saw him no more until the evening, when he returned with a slow step and haggard face, which assured me that he had made no great progress with his investigation. He glanced at a telegram which awaited him and threw it into the grate. "From the Plymouth went a little too high. "From the Plymouth Hotel, Watson," he said. "I learned the name of it from the vicar, and I wired to make certain that Dr. Leon Sterndale's account was true. It appears that he did indeed spend last night there, and that he was actually allowed some of his baggage to go on to Africa, while he returned to be present at this investigation. What do you make of that, Watson?" "He is deeply interested." "Deeply interested, yes. There's a thread here which we have not yet grasped, and which might lead us through the tangle. Cheer up, Watson, for I am very sure that our material has not yet all come to hand. When it does, we may soon leave our difficulties behind us." Little did I think how soon the words of Holmes would be realized, or how strange and sinister would be that new development, which opened an entirely fresh line of investigation. I was shaving at my window in the morning when I heard the rattle of hooves, and looking up, saw a dog cart coming at a gallop down the road. It pulled up at our door, and our friend the vicar sprang from it, and rushed up to our garden path. Holmes was already dressed, and we hastened down to meet him. Our visitor was so excited that he could hardly articulate, but at last in gasps and bursts his tragic story came out of him. "We are devil-ridden, Mr. Holmes. My poor parish is devil-ridden," he cried. "Satan himself is loose in it! We are given over into his hands!" He danced about in his agitation, a ludicrous object if it were not for his ashy face and startled eyes. Finally he shot out his terrible news. "Mr. Mortimer Tringellis died during the night, and with exactly the same symptoms as the rest of his family." Holmes sprang to his feet, all energy in an instant. "Can you fit us both into your dog cart?" "Yes, I can." "Then, Watson, we will postpone our breakfast. Mr. Roundhay, we are entirely at your disposal. Hurry! Hurry before things get disarranged." The lodger occupied 2 rooms at the vicarage, which were in an angle by themselves, the one above the other. Below was a large sitting room, above his bedroom. They looked out upon a croquet lawn, which came up to the windows. We had arrived before the doctor or the police, so that everything was absolutely undisturbed. Let me describe exactly the scene as we saw it upon that misty March morning. It has left an impression which can never be effaced from my mind. The atmosphere of the room was of a horrible and depressing stuffiness. The servant who had first entered had thrown up the window, or it would have been even more intolerable. That might partially be due to the fact that a lamp stood flaring and smoking on the center table. Ah. Beside it sat the dead man, leaning back in his chair, his thin beard projecting, his spectacles pushed up onto his forehead, and his lean dark face turned towards the window and twisted into the same distortion of terror which had marked the features of his dead sister. His limbs were convulsed and his fingers contorted as though he had died in a very paroxysm of fear. He was fully clothed, though there were signs that his dressing had been done in a hurry. We had already learned that his bed had been slept in, and that the tragic end had come to him in the early morning. One realized the red-hot energy which underlay Holmes' trying to pronounce this one phlegmatic exterior when one saw the sudden change which came over him from the moment that he entered the fatal apartment. In an instant he was tense and alert, his eyes shining, like his face set, his limbs quivering with eager activity. He was out on the lawn, in through the window, round the house, and up into the bedroom, for all the world like a dashing foxhound drawing a cover. In the bedroom he made a rapid case around and ended by throwing open the window, which appeared to give him some fresh cause for excitement, for he leaned out of it with loud ejaculations of interest and delight. I'm sorry. I know it's so childish of me. Oh dear. Oh dear, those old writings. Then he rushed down the stair, out through the open window, and threw himself upon his face on the lawn, sprang up and into the room once more, all with the energy of the hunter who is at the very heels of his quarry. The lamp, which was an ordinary standard, he examined with minute care, making certain measurements upon its bowl. He carefully scrutinized with his lens the talc shield which covered the top of the chimney, and scraped off some ashes which adhered to its upper surface, putting some of them into an envelope. Oh. Which he placed in his pocketbook. Finally, just as the doctor and the official police put in an appearance, he beckoned to the vicar, and we all 3 went out upon the lawn. "I am glad to say that my investigation has not been entirely barren," he remarked. "I cannot remain to discuss the matter with the police, but I should be exceedingly obliged, Mr. Roundtree, if you would give the inspector my compliments, and direct his attention to the bedroom window, and to the sitting-room lamp. Each is suggestive, and together they are almost conclusive. If the police would desire further information, I shall be happy to see any of them at the cottage. And now, Watson, I think that perhaps we shall be better employed elsewhere." It may be that the police resented the intrusion of an amateur, or that they imagined themselves to be upon some hopeful line of investigation. but it is certain that we heard nothing from them for the next 2 days. During this time, Holmes spent some of his time smoking and dreaming in the cottage, but a greater portion in country walks which he undertook alone, returning after many hours without remark as to where he had been. One experiment served to show me the line of his investigation. He had bought a lamp which was the duplicate of the one which had burned in the room of Mortimer Tringellis on the Mount morning of the tragedy. This he filled with the same oil as that used at the vicarage, and he carefully timed the period which it would take to be exhausted. Another experiment which he made was of a more unpleasant nature, and one which I am not likely ever to forget. So, my dear scholars, what do you think Holmes is planning to do? What is about this experiment that you think Holmes is about to undertake? Any ideas, my dear scholars? Julian 20, not sure. Oh, okay. Can anyone give a guess on what this experiment is? And how it links with this terrible mystery? Any answers? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? Anyone? Okay, well, let's see what it's all about then. What was that, horse? Um, I'm not quite sure if that's no, no, just no, no, no. Let's see. Let's. All right. Well, then let us continue. You remember, Watson, he remarked one afternoon, that there is a single common point, a resemblance in the varying reports which have reached us. Cole Skelton, I imagine Horace as the chaotic type. He is somewhat. He prefers to call himself creatively energetic, as it were. There is a single common point of resemblance in the varied reports which have reached us. This concerns the effect of the atmosphere of the room in each case upon those who had first entered it. You will recollect that Mortimer Tringellis, in describing the episode of his last visit to his brother's house, remarked that the doctor, on entering the room, fell into a chair. Oh, I had forgotten that. You had forgotten? Well, I can answer for it that it was so. Now you will remember also that Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper, told us that she herself fainted upon entering the room, and had afterwards opened the window. In the second case, that of Mortimer Tringellis himself, you cannot have forgotten the horrible stuffiness of the room when we arrived, though the servant had thrown open the window. That servant, I found upon inquiry, was so ill that she had gone to her bed. You'll admit, Watson, that these facts are very suggestive. In each case there is evidence of a poisonous atmosphere. In each case also there is a combustion going on in the room. In the one case a fire, in the other a lamp. The fire was needed, but the lamp was lit, as a comparison of the oil consumed with a show, long after it was broad daylight. Why? Surely because there is some connection between the three things: the burning, the stuffy atmosphere, and finally the madness or death of those unfortunate people. That is clear, is it not? It would appear so. At last we may accept it as a working hypothesis. We will suppose, then, that something was burned in each case, which produced an atmosphere causing strange toxic effects. Very good.
In the first instance, that of the Tringelis family, this substance was placed in the fire. Now the window was shut, but the fire would naturally carry fumes to some extent up the chimney. Hence, one would expect the effects of the poison to be less than in the second case, where there was less escape for the vapor. The result seems to indicate that it was so, since in the first case only the woman, who had presumably more who had presumably the more sensitive organism. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. Really? Really, Doyle? Very well. Who had presumably the more sensitive organism was killed, the others exhibiting that temporary or permanent lunacy, which is evidently the first effect of the drug. In the second case, the result was complete. The facts, therefore, seem to bear out the theory of poison which worked by combustion. With this train of reasoning in my head, I naturally looked about in Mortimer Tringelis's room to find some remains of this substance. The obvious place to look was the talc shelf or smoke guard of the lamp. There, sure enough, I perceived a number of flaky ashes, and round the edges a fringe of brownish powder, which had not yet been consumed. Half of this I took, as you saw, and I placed it in an envelope. Why half, Holmes? It is not for me, my dear Watson, to stand in the way of the official police force. I leave them all the evidence which I found. The poison still remained upon the talc, had they the wit to find it. Now, Watson, we will light our lamp. We will, however, take the precaution to open our window to avoid the premature decease of two deserving members of society. So full of himself, I love it. And you will seat yourself near that open window in an armchair, unless, like a sensible man, you determine to have nothing to do with the affair. I will see it out, will you? I thought I knew my Watson. This chair I will place opposite yours, so that we may be the same distance from the poison, and face to face. The door we will leave ajar. Each is now in a position to watch the other, and to bring the experiment to an end should the symptoms seem alarming. Is that all clear? Well then, I take our powder, so what remains of it, from the envelope, and I lay it above the burning lamp. So! Now, Watson, let us sit down and await developments. This seems like kind of a really dangerous and stupid idea of Holmes, honestly. They were not long in coming. I had hardly settled in my chair before I was conscious of a thick, musky odor, subtle and nauseous. At the very first whiff of it, my brain and my imagination were beyond all control. A thick black cloud swirled before my eyes, and my mind told me that in this cloud, unseen as yet, but about to spring out upon my appalled senses, lurked all that was vaguely horrible, all that was monstrous and inconceivably wicked in the universe. Vague shapes swirled and swarmed amid the dark cloud bank, each a menace and a warning of something coming. The advent of some unspeakable dweller upon the threshold. Firefly, he does substances, so oh jeez. Well, actually at this point I think Doyle actually wrote out the infamous cocaine habit that Holmes had done. I think it was going out of favor by that point. Whose very shadow would blast my soul. A freezing horror took possession of me. I felt that my hair was rising, that my eyes were protruding, that my mouth was open, my tongue like leather. The turmoil within my brain was such that something must surely snap. I tried to scream and was vaguely aware of some hoarse croak which was my own voice, but distant and detached from myself. At the same moment, in some effort of escape, I broke through that cloud of despair and had a glimpse of Holmes' face, white, rigid, and drawn with horror, the very look which I had seen upon the features of the dead. It was that vision which gave me an instant of sanity and of strength. I dashed from my chair, threw my arms around Holmes, and together we lurched through the door, and an instant afterwards had thrown ourselves down upon the grass plot, and were lying side by side, conscious only of the glorious sunshine which was bursting its way through the hellish cloud of terror which had girt us in. Ah, he cares so much. Private Maverick, I do cocaine. All that reference. We were seen upon the ground. Slowly it rose from our souls like the mist from a landscape, until peace and reason had returned, and were seen upon the grass wiping our clammy foreheads, and looking with apprehension at each other to mark the last traces of that terrific experience which we had undergone. Uh, Upon my word, Watson, said Holmes at last with an unsteady tone, I, I owe you both my thanks. An apology. It was an unjustifiable experiment, even for oneself, and doubly so for a friend. I am I am really very sorry. See, Holmes apologizes. He apologizes whenever he screws up. Firefly always depending on Watson to save him. Yes, Watson is the reliable friend. You know, I answered with some emotion, for I have never seen so much of Holmes' heart before. That it is my greatest joy and privilege to help you. He relapsed at once into the half humorous, half cynical vein which was his habitual attitude to those about him. It would be sup, uh, it'd be superfluous to drive us mad, my dear Watson, said he. A candid observer would certainly declare that we were so already before we embarked upon so wild an experiment. I confess that I never imagined that the effect would be so sudden and so severe. He dashed into the cottage, and reappearing with the burning lamp held at full arm's length, he threw it upon a bank of brambles. We must give the room a little time to clear. I take it, Watson, that you have no longer a shadow of doubt as to how these tragedies were produced. None whatever. But the cause remains as obscure as before. Come to the arbor here, and let us discuss it together. That villainous stuff seems still to linger round my throat. I think we must admit that all the evidence points to this man, Mortimer Tringellis, having been the criminal in the first tragedy. Interesting. Though he was the victim in the second one. We must remember in the first place that there is some story of a family quarrel, followed by recollection. How bitter that quarrel may have been, or how hollow the recollection, we cannot tell. When I think of Mortimer Tringellis with the foxy face and the small, shrewd, beady eyes behind the spectacles, he is not a man whom I should judge to be of a particularly forgiving disposition. Well, in the next place, you will remember that this idea of someone moving in the garden, which took our attention for a moment from the real cause of the tragedy, emanated from him. He had a motive in misleading us. Finally, if he did not throw the substance into the fire at the moment of leaving the room, who did do so? That is a hard line to say. Who did do so? Try and say that 5 times fast, my dear scholars. Who did do so? The affair happened immediately after his departure. Had anyone else come in, the family would certainly have risen from the table. Besides, in peaceful Cornwall, visitors did not arrive after 10 o'clock at night. We may take it, then, that all the evidence points to Mortimer Tringellis as the culprit. Then his own death was suicide. Well, Watson, it is on the face of it a not impossible supposition.
The man who had the guilt upon his soul of having brought such a fate upon his own family might well be driven by remorse to inflict it upon himself. There are, however, some cognate reasons against it. Fortunately, there is one man in England who knows all about it, and I have made arrangements by which we shall hear the facts this afternoon from his own lips. Ah! He is a little before his time. Perhaps you would kindly step this way, Dr. Leonard, Leon Sterndale. We had been conducting a chemical experiments indoors which has left our little room hardly fit for the reception of so distinguished a visitor. I had heard the click of the garden gates, and now the majestic figure of the great African explorer appeared upon the path. He turned in some surprise towards the rustic arbor in which we sat. "You sent for me, Mr. Holmes. I had your note about an hour ago, and I have come, though I really do not know why I should obey your summons." "Perhaps we can clear the point up before we separate," said Holmes. "Meanwhile, I am much obliged to you for your courteous acquaintance. You'll excuse this informal reception in the open air, but my friend Watson and I have nearly furnished an additional chapter to what the papers call the Cornish horror, and we prefer a clear atmosphere for the present. Perhaps, since the matter which we have to discuss will affect you personally in a very intimate fashion, it is well that we should talk where there can be no eavesdropping." The explorer took his cigar from his lips and gazed sternly at his companion. I'm at a loss to know, sir," he said, "what you can have to speak about which affects me personally in a very intimate fashion." "The killing of Mortimer Tringellis," said Holmes. For a moment I wished that I was armed. Sterndale's fierce face turned to a dusky red, his eyes glared, and the knotted, passionate veins started out in his forehead, while he sprang forward with clenched fists towards my companion. Then he stopped, and with a violent effort he resumed a cold, rigid calmness, which was perhaps more suggestive of danger than his hot-headed outburst. Okay, I forgive the next sentence that he says. It's just the way it's written. I say I don't forgive it. I mean, forgive me for the next sentence. I mean, forgive me for reading the next sentence as it is written. I can't help it. It's just the way it's written in the story. Ugh. "I have lived so long among savages and beyond the law," said he, "that I have got into the way of being a law unto myself. You would do well, Mr. Holmes, not to forget it, for I have no desire to do you injury." "Nor have I any desire to do you injury, Dr. Sterndale. Surely the clearest proof of it is that, knowing what I know, I have sent for you, and not for the police." Sterndale sat down with a gasp, overawed for perhaps the first time in his adventurous life. There was a calm assurance of power in Holmes' manner, which could not be withstood. Our visitor stammered for a moment, his great hands opening and shutting in his agitation. "What do you mean?" he asked at last. "If this is bluff upon your part, Mr. Holmes, you have chosen a bad man for your experiment. Let us have no more beating about the bush. What do you mean?" "I will tell you," said Holmes, "and the reasons why I tell you is that I hope frankness may beget frankness. What my next step may be will depend entirely upon the nature of your own defense."
"My defense?"
"Yes, sir."
"My defense against what?"
"Against the charge of killing Mortimer Tringellis." "Oh, so he's the killer." Sterndale mopped his forehead with his handkerchief.
"Upon my word, you are getting on," said he. "Do all your successes depend upon this prodigious power of bluff?"
"The bluff," said Holmes sternly, "is upon your side, Dr. Leon Sterndale, and not upon mine.
As a proof, I will tell you some of the facts upon which my conclusions are based. Of your return from Plymouth, allowing much of your property to go on to Africa, I will say nothing save that it is first informed me that you are one of the factors which had to be taken into account in reconstructing the drama. I came back. I have heard your reason and regard them as unconvincing and inadequate. We will pass that. You came down here to ask me whom I suspected. I refused to answer you. You then went to the vicarage, waited outside it for some time, and finally returned to your cottage. How do you know that? I followed you. I saw no one. That is what you may expect to see when I follow you. Oh, oh, Holmes is really getting. Oh, he is confident. You spent a restless night at your cottage, and you formed certain plans, which in the early morning you proceeded to put into execution, leaving your door just as day was breaking. You filled your pockets with some reddish gravel that was lying heaped beside your gate. Sterndal gave a violent start and looked at Holmes in amazement. You then walked swiftly for the mile which separated you from the vicarage. You are wearing, I may remark, the same pair of ribbed tennis shoes, which are at the present moment upon your feet. Wow, tennis shoes were around even back then, it seems. Mm. Unless they mean a different kind of tennis shoe. More water. Oh my goodness. At the vicarage you passed through the orchard and the side hedge, coming out under the window of the lodger Tregellis. It was now daylight, but the household was not yet stirring. You drew some of the gravel from your pocket and you threw it up at the window above you. Sterndale sprang to his feet. I believe that you are the devil himself, he cried. Holmes smiled at the compliment. It took 2 or possibly 3 handfuls before the lodger came to the window. You beckoned him to come down. He dressed hurriedly and descended to his sitting room. You entered by the window. There was an interview, a short one, during which you walked up and down the room. Then you passed out and closed the window, standing on the lawn outside, smoking a cigar, and watching what occurred. Finally, after the death of Tringalis, you withdrew as you had come. Now, Dr. Sterndale, how do you justify such conduct? And what were the motives for your actions? If you precipitate or trifle with me, I give you my assurance that the matter will pass out of my hands forever. Our visitor's face had turned ashen gray as he listened to the words of his accuser. Now he sat for some time in thought with his face sunk in his hands. Then, with a sudden impulsive gesture, he plucked a photograph from his breast pocket and threw it on the rustic table before us. That is why I have done it, said he. It showed the bust and face of a very beautiful woman. Holmes stooped over it. Brenda Tringellis, said. Brenda Tringellis, said he. Yes, Brenda Tringellis, repeated our visitor. For years I've loved her. For years she has loved me. Dire is the secret of that corner's seclusion which people have marveled at. It has brought me close to the one thing on earth that was dear to me. I could not marry her, for I have a wife who has left me for years, and yet whom, by the deplorable laws of England, I could not divorce. For years Brenda waited. For years I waited. And this is what we have waited for. A terrible sob shook his great frame, and he clutched his throat under his bridled beard. Then with an effort he mastered himself and spoke on. The vicar knew he was in our confidence. He would tell you that she was an angel upon earth. That was why he telegraphed to me and I returned. What was my baggage or Africa to me when I learned that fate had come upon my darling. There you have the missing clue to my action, Mr. Holmes.
Proceed, said my friend. Dr. Sterndal drew from his pocket a paper packet and laid it upon the table. On the outside was written Radix Pedis Diabole, with a red poison label beneath it. He pushed it towards me.
I understand that you are a doctor, sir. Have you ever heard of this preparation?
Devil's foot roots? No, I have never heard of it.
It is no reflection upon your professional knowledge, said he, for I believe that, save for one sample in a laboratory at Buda, there is no other specimen in Europe. It has not yet found its way either into the pharma- pharmacopoeia or into the literature of toxicology. The root is shaped like a foot, half human, half goat-like, hence the fanciful name given by the botanical missionary. It is used as an ordeal poison by the medicine men in certain districts of West Africa. It is kept as a secret among them. This particular specimen I obtained under very extraordinary circumstances in the Umbanji country. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know how to pronounce that. He opened the paper as he spoke and disclosed a heap of reddish brown snuff-like powder. Well, sir? Well, sir? Asked Holmes sternly. I am about to tell you, Mr. Holmes, all that actually occurred, for you already know so much that is clearly to my interest that you should know all. I have already explained the relationship in which I stood to the Tringellis family. For the sake of the sister, I was friendly with the brothers. There were a family quarrel about money which estranged this man, Mortimer, but it was supposed to be made up, and I afterwards met him as I did the others. He was a sly, subtle, scheming man, and several things arose which gave me a suspicion of him, but I had no cause for any previous quarrel. One day, only a couple of weeks ago, he came down to my cottage, and I showed him some of my African curiosities. Among other things, I exhibited this powder, and told him of its strange properties. How it stimulates those brain centers which control the emotion of fear, and how either madness or death is the fate of the unhappy native who is subjugated to the ordeal by the priest of his tribe. I told him also how powerless European science would be to detect it.
That's a really foolish, stupid thing for him to tell a guy.
How he took it, I cannot say, for I never left the room. There is no doubt that it was then, while I was opening cabinets and stooping to boxes, that he managed to abstract some of the devil's foot root. I well remember how he plied me with questions as to the amount and the time was needed for its effects, but I little dreamed that he would have a personal reason for asking. I thought no more of the matter until the vicar's telegram reached me in Plymouth. This villain had thought that I would be at sea before the news could reach me, that I should be lost for years in Africa, but I returned at once. Of course, I could not listen to the details without feeling assured that my poison had been used. I came round to see you on the chance that some other explanation had been used. That some other explanation had suggested itself to you, but there could be none. I was convinced that Mortimer Tringellis was the murderer, and for the sake of money, with the idea perhaps that if the other members of his family were all insane, he would be the sole guardian of that joint property. He had used the devil's foot powder upon them, driven two of them out of their senses, and killed his sister Brenda, the one human being whom I have ever loved, or who has ever loved me. There was his crime. What was to be his punishment? Should I appeal to the law? Where was my proof? I knew that the facts were true, but how could I help to make a jury of countrymen believe so fantastic a story? I might or might not, but I could not afford to fail. My soul cried out for revenge. I have said to you once before, Mr. Holmes, that I have spent much of my time outside the law, and that I have come at last to be a law to myself. So it was even now I determined that the fate which he had given to others should be shared by himself. Either that, or I would do justice upon him with my own hand. In all England there can be no man who sets less value upon his own life than I do at the present moment. Now I have told you all. You have yourself supplied the rest. I did, as you say, spent a restless night. Set off early from my cottage. I foresaw the difficulty of arousing him, so I gathered some gravel from the pile which you have mentioned, and I used it to throw up to his window. He came down and admitted me through the window of the sitting room. I laid his offence before him. I told him that I had come both as jury and executioner. The wretch sank into a chair, paralyzed at the sight of my revolver. I lit the lamp, put the powder above it, and stood outside the window, ready to carry out my threat to shoot him should he try to leave the room. In 5 minutes he died. Oh my God, how he died! But my heart was flint, for he endured nothing which my innocent darling had not felt before him. There is my story, Mr. Holmes. Perhaps if you loved a woman, you would have done as much yourself. At any rate, I am in your hands. You can take what steps you like. As I have already said, there is no man living who can fear death less than I do. Holmes sat for some little time in silence. What was your plans? He asked at last. I had intended to bury myself in Central Africa. My work there is but half finished. Go and do the other half, said Holmes. I at least am not prepared to prevent you. Dr. Sterndal raised his giant figure, bowed gravely, and walked from the armor. Holmes lit his pipe and handed me his pouch. Some fumes which are not poisonous would be a welcome change, said he. I think you must agree, Watson, that it is not a case in which we are called upon to interfere. Our investigation has been independent, and our action shall be so also. You would not denounce the man? Certainly not, I answered. I have never loved Watson, but if I did, and if the woman I loved had met such an end, I might act even as our lawless lion hunter has done. Who knows? Well, Watson, I will not offend your intelligence by explaining what is obvious. The gravel upon the window sill was, of course, the starting point of my research. It was unlike anything in the vicarage garden. Only when my attention had been drawn to Dr. Sterndal and his cottage did I find its counterpart. The lamp shining in broad daylight, and the remains of powder upon the shield were successive links in a fairly obvious chain. And now, my dear Watson, I think we may dismiss the matter from our mind, and go back with a clear conscience to the study of those Chaldean roots which are surely to be traced in the Cornish branch of the great Celtic speech. Whew. And that was the adventure of the Devil's Root. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize how long those stories were. Oh. So, I shall open the curtains, close the curtains, and we shall move on to our chat room where I will close out for the evening or the morning or wherever it is. Ah, there we are. Yes. Oh, my goodness. So that was a little bit of Sherlock Holmes. One that was in the public domain and one that is now in the public domain. Ah, it is really refreshing to read those stories once more. Mm. So, I was gonna have a long discussion about some of the Sherlock Holmes stories and about the go into more detail about the Doyle estate, but that story, oh my goodness, that story really.
It wore me out quite a bit. So I think it might be in my best interests to rest my voice for now. All right, let me see. So our next week's schedule will be I am gonna have to postpone the Return to Monkey Island gameplay next Tuesday, as me and Horace have a situation to attend to. Nothing too serious, but we will be dealing with that. Ah, Dr. Zam, tell us the story next time. Oh, someone's eager. So next Thursday, if all works out, we will be reading the first chapters of L. Frank Baum's The Sea Fairies, a story which he wrote, which is not an Oz story, but is tied to the greater Oz continuity. I'm really excited to read this story. I've never read the book. I do know some of the characters from some later Oz books, but I'm really, really excited to read those. And speaking of Oz, I believe Sophia Ignace is reading Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz tonight, which is book 4 of the Oz series. So I think we'll raid her tonight. To close out, I say unto you, my dear scholars, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, till we meet again at the study. Farewell, take care, and I shall see you next time. Bye bye.